Good morning. Today we're going to talk about how we inherit the traits that we have, and we're talking about traits that are inherited, like hair color, eye color, height, things like that. Now with humans, it's a little more complex, so we're just going to talk about things in the simplest form. Let's say we're talking about the trait for height, okay? So if we're talking about height, my pen is not going, let's see, there we go. Height, let's just use the extremes of things. So you can either be tall or you can be short. We're not going to talk about medium height or like extra tall or extra short. We're just going to be tall or short. Now, when you inherit that gene, you're going to inherit one allele, that's what we call it, from each parent. An allele is just the different forms a trait could have. So it's a different form of a trait. So for example, you'd either have a tall allele or a short allele from mom. And then you'd have a tall allele or a short allele from dad. Now, some of you may look at your parents and maybe mom is short and dad is tall, but you're tall. That means that the genes you inherit from dad are stronger. And the ways that we show these alleles is we use letters. And letters don't mean anything. It's just easier than writing down the actual gene combination because our genes, the code for them can be very long and complex. So when we're talking about height, we might use, we usually use the first letter of the dominant trait. And I'm going to talk about dominant in a second. So we would use big T would mean tall, and then a little t would be short. And in this case, this trait here would be dominant. And this trait here would be what we call recessive. So dominant traits are shown with capital letters, and recessive traits are shown by lowercase letters. Whenever a dominant trait or a dominant gene is present, this is the trait that's always shown. So always shown when present. The only way you can show a recessive trait is when no dominant alleles are inherited. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So let's start by, I'm going to move that up. Hopefully, I think you guys could probably pause here if you need to look more. So let's just review what dominant. So dominant alleles are shown by capital letters. So if I put a series of letters here, it could be any letters. I know I forgot F. I'll squeeze it in there. Now, if I ask you to go through and maybe circle the ones that are dominant or the ones that could be shown by dominant, you would circle the capital letters because the capital letter is how we represent a dominant gene. Now, if we talk about a recessive trait, recessive is going to be shown by lowercase letters. So if I use those same series of letters and I'm throwing my mix of capital and lowercase, this time you would circle all the lowercase letters because that's how we show recessive. Now, I said that you inherit a pair of genes, right? So you get one chromosome or one, I don't want to say chromosome, one allele, let's use the word allele, from dad for a trait and one from mom for a trait. Now, whenever you see the capital letter, that's the trait that's going to show. So, for example, let's go back to big T being tall and little t being short. Let's say that you get a tall gene from dad, and let's make mom red. So blue for the father and red will be the mother. And a tall gene from mom. There are two capital T's here. So automatically you're going to show the dominant trait, which would be tall. Now, let's say you get a tall gene from dad and a short gene from mom. If you remember, I'm going to scroll back up here for a second. We said a dominant trait is always shown when present. So now we have a dominant gene here because there's a dominant gene, this individual is going to be tall. It kind of like blocks out the lowercase letter, okay? It squishes it. It's bigger, it's stronger, it's more powerful. It is going to knock it out, and it's going to show the trait of the lowercase letter. Now, let's say you get a short gene from dad. I'm sorry, it's going to show the trait of the uppercase letter, not the lowercase. I made a mistake. And then you get a short gene from mom. Well, now I have two short genes. The only option here is to be short. So something you need to understand here, really, I think you'll know when it's both big T's, it's going to be tall. Both little t's, it's going to be short. This does not give us medium. It's still tall because the dominant gene, I like to think about it as it crushes the recessive trait. Whenever a capital letter is present, that's the trait that's shown. Now, I'm going to make this a little bit more confusing, and I don't want to, but there's a lot of vocabulary here. So when we see pairs of letters, there's ways we describe them. We got dominant and recessive. Now there's a term called hybrid. Hybrid means the same thing as this other term called heterozygous. Now, I like to think about hybrid like the car. If you know anything about a hybrid car can run off of gas and it can run off of electric. So it's a mix of two things. So hybrid would be like big T, little t. And we don't only have to use T's. It could be like big B, little b. Or big C, little c. What I want you to notice, though, is that if I'm using T's, it's both T's. B's, both B's, both C's. I'm not using big C, little c. It's the same letter. Now, that's hybrid. It's a mix. Now we have pure dominant, which means the same thing as homozygous dominant. So if something is pure, that means it's the same. And if it's dominant, this should tell you that it's capital. So pure dominant would be two big T's, or two big B's, or two big C's, both capital letters. The last one is pure recessive. So it's the same idea, except now instead of talking about a dominant trait, we're talking about a recessive trait. So instead of two capital letters, now we're looking at two lowercase letters. I'm going to give you some practice. I'm actually going to see if I can, nope, I can't shrink it, but let me move my pen here. Okay, let's see if we can do some practice. So let's say we're going back to actually let's try this. Big B is brown for brown eyes. Little b is blue for blue eyes. Let's say I asked you to give me an example of a hybrid for this eye color. So hybrid, if I look at my key up here, hybrid is a mix. So that's going to be big B, little b. If I ask you to give me an example of homozygous dominant, and it might be a good idea maybe to pause it so that you can try it on your own before I just stick the answer up here at you. But homozygous dominant is going to be two big B's. Homozygous means the same. What else could this be the same as? What else could homozygous dominant be the same thing as? Pure dominant. And then lastly, we have homozygous recessive. Gotta squeeze it in there. And how could we show that? Two little b's. And this would be the same thing as pure recessive. And I didn't show you this one. What could hybrid be the same thing as? Heterozygous. So I'm going to stop here with this video, and I'm going to add a second video to talk about one more set of vocabulary words.